town were burning. From my suspended platform, I watched an entire city fall. The Chicago I knew died before my eyes. What struck me most was what I couldn't see happening inside the buildings. All those glass towers turned into vertical tombs. I kept thinking about the thousands of people trapped in their offices, in elevators, and stairwells. What was happening behind the gleaming windows I usually cleaned? On that third day, as my supplies dwindled to nothing, I began to notice something crucial. The infections seemed to spread differently at ground level than in high rises. From my vantage point, I could see infected swarming densely in the streets, but fewer seemed to emerge from upper floors of buildings. Something about elevation was affecting the pattern. I just didn't know how important that observation would become. By the end of the third day, I had no choice. I was out of water, severely dehydrated, and growing weaker. I had to get inside. I took inventory of my tools: plas cutter, suction handles, rope system, harness, multi-tool, all designed for maintenance, not breaking and entering. But I knew the weaknesses of these buildings better than anyone. I knew where the glass was thinnest, where the seals might have the slightest give. It took me nearly an hour to create an entry point. Precision work, fighting exhaustion and thirst. One wrong move and I'd plummet 53 stories. Finally, I cut a section large enough to slip through, using my suction handles to carefully remove the glass panel. The silence inside was disorienting after days of distant sirens and chaos. The 53rd floor was a corporate law firm. Abandoned desks, half-empty coffee cups, a jacket still hanging on a chair, evidence of a hasty evacuation. I moved through the space cautiously, alert for any sound. The emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow. I headed straight for the break room, where I downed 3 bottles of water from the refrigerator and shoved more into my tool bag. While rummaging through desk drawers for anything useful, I found a building security pass clipped to an abandoned backpack. The name matched the emergency coordinator whose voice I'd heard on the radio when the crisis began. The pass was covered in dried blood, but it would give me access to parts of the building most people couldn't reach. I just didn't realize I'd find her there too. I needed to establish my bearings, find a secure location, and create a plan. The executive floors seemed the logical choice. Fewer access points, better security features. The emergency stairwell would take me there. As I approached the stairwell door, I followed my lifelong habit. Touched the frame 3 times before entering. It seemed silly, but those little rituals kept me sane in the days that followed. The stairwell was dark, emergency lights flickering. I climbed rather than descended, my instincts already telling me that higher was safer. Each floor I passed showed signs of panic. Dropped items, bloodstains, doors left ajar. The higher I went, the fewer signs of violence I found. On the 64th floor, I heard it for the first time. A wet, shuffling sound coming from the landing below. Heavy breathing that wasn't quite human. I froze, listening as it approached. Through the gap in the railing, I caught glimpses of movement. Someone climbing the stairs, but the footsteps were irregular. Dragging. Wrong. I continued upward, silent as possible, putting distance between myself and whatever was below. The rooftop access would be locked, but the 68th floor, that was where the executive suites were located. I slipped through the door and into the plush reception area of the CEO's domain. The security pass I found worked. The reinforced glass doors slid open, then closed behind me with a reassuring click. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the burning city stretched to the horizon. But I was inside now, safe at least temporarily. I did a thorough sweep of the executive floor. Empty. No signs of infection or struggle. The space had clearly been evacuated before things got bad. The CEO's private bathroom had running water. The building's rooftop tanks would provide that luxury for at least a few days. A kitchenette was stocked with non-perishable snacks and drinks. A first aid kit hung on the wall. Most importantly, the floor had limited access points. 2 stairwells and the elevator bank, all secured by keycard access. As I created a makeshift bed using couch cushions placed near the ceiling on top of a bookshelf, old habits, I heard banging at the stairwell door. The security card reader was flashing red repeatedly. Something was trying to get in, swiping a card over and over without success. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached the door cautiously and looked through the small security window. What I saw haunts me still. It was her, the emergency coordinator whose security pass I now held. Or what remained of her. Her skin was gray, mottled with black veins. Her movements were jerky yet somehow purposeful. Most disturbing was how she was using her access card, repeatedly swiping it at the reader. The infection hadn't completely destroyed her procedural memory. She remembered enough to use tools. I backed away from the door, processing what I'd seen. The infected woman continued her efforts for hours before finally giving up. Through my observation, I noticed something odd about her movements. She seemed slower than the infected I'd observed at street level, less coordinated. Something about the height was affecting her. A theory I couldn't test yet, but would bet my life on later. That first night, I scoured the executive floor for anything useful. In the CEO's desk, I found something unexpected: the building's emergency protocols. Page 34 mentioned skybridge access codes for emergencies. Bridges I'd never seen in all my years working on these buildings. Secret connections between the most powerful buildings in Chicago, not on any public blueprint. Using the CEO's private bathroom, I showered for the first time in days. The hot water was a luxury I knew might not last. I ate sparingly from the kitchenette supplies, unsure when I'd find more. I charged my phone, though networks were down, and I began planning. The executive suite became my first sanctuary, but I knew it couldn't be permanent. Supplies would run out. The water pressure would eventually fail. I needed to expand my territory, create routes, find resources. Most of all, I needed to understand this new vertical world I found myself in. For the next 3 days, I explored the building systematically, floor by floor, starting from the top down. I discovered that the infected were concentrated below the 40th floor. Above that, their movements were sluggish, their coordination poor. Above the 60th floor, I encountered none at all. I began developing rules for myself. Never venture below the 30th floor unless absolutely necessary. Always maintain 3 separate escape routes. Never enter a new area without fully mapping it first. And most importantly, the ground was now a death sentence. Using my industrial rope skills and equipment from the building's maintenance storage, I began to craft my first sky routes. Initial attempts were simple. Rope bridges between adjacent window washing platforms. I tested each anchor point obsessively, ensuring it could bear weight under stress. My life literally hung on these connections. As I grew more confident, I expanded my network. The adjacent office tower was just 15 meters away, a challenging crossing but possible with the right setup. I spent an entire day preparing, calculating angles and testing knots. The first crossing was terrifying, dangling hundreds of feet above a city of the dead, wind threatening to throw me off course. But I made it. The second tower offered new resources, new supplies, and most importantly, new perspective. From there, I could see further, map more territory, plan more routes. I started marking my paths with specific symbols using my glass etching tools. Small, nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for. Little did I know, someone else would later recognize my system. Each night, I'd return to my executive suite sanctuary, updating my notebook with new routes, new observations about infected behavior, new resource catches. I established a rule from the beginning: never travel the same route twice in a row, never become predictable. Over the following week, I expanded my network to 8 buildings in the downtown core. I developed a shorthand for my maps, marking resources, hazards, and security features. I created supply catches at intersection points, always hidden, always secured. The physical toll was immense: constant climbing, rigging, testing, but my body adapted. My hands grew calloused, my arms stronger, my instincts sharper. From my various vantage points, I observed the city below transforming. The infected moved in increasingly coordinated patterns. Military blockades failed one by one. Fires burned unchecked in residential districts. The Chicago River turned dark with ash and worse things. On the 10th day, while observing from the Millennium Center's roof, I saw my first sign of other survivors: a reflection, deliberate, rhythmic, from a building half a mile east. Someone signaling with a mirror. I observed for hours, trying to determine if it was safe, if it was truly human. The next day, I spotted movement on that same rooftop. People, actual living people, tending what looked like container gardens. From my position, I counted 7 individuals. They had created a functional rooftop settlement, complete with rainwater collection and what appeared to be a wind turbine for power. I spent 2 days debating whether to make contact. The isolation was crushing me, but my survival had depended on remaining alone, unseen, unpredictable. Eventually, I decided on a compromise. I'd establish visual communication first, test their intentions, remain at a distance. Using my own mirror, I sent a simple signal at noon when the sun was brightest. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes. The universal SOS. Within minutes, they responded with the same pattern. That evening, using powerful LED flashlights I collected, we established rudimentary communication via Morse code. They were survivors from the building's residential floors, a doctor, an engineer, and several others with practical skills. They've been watching my movements between buildings for days, fascinated by my rope systems. We arranged a meeting point, a rooftop halfway between our positions. I insisted on maintaining my own escape route, suspicious by nature and necessity. They agreed to similar terms. Trust was a luxury none of us could afford anymore. As I prepared for this first contact with other survivors, I established a rule for myself. Never reveal all your routes to anyone. It seemed paranoid at the time, but that rule would save my life in the weeks that followed. I had no idea then that I'd soon break that rule for a trapped family, setting in motion events that would lead me to this farmhouse, recording what might be my final message. My whole life, people laughed at my strange habits. Now those same habits were keeping me alive in a world where touching the ground meant death. The city below was lost, but up here in the vertical world, I found a way to survive. For how long, I didn't know. But I was determined to live one more day, and then another, and another after that. Little did I know that what I was observing, the patterns of the infected, their limitations, their evolution, would become crucial information. Information worth killing for. Information that might explain why I'm now trapped in this farmhouse attic, with those things trying to get in. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about my first face-to-face encounter with one of the infected, and what I learned that changed everything. That first encounter with an infected up close changed how I understood what we were dealing with. I had observed them from a distance, but seeing one face-to-face was different. It happened during my initial exploration of the Chicago Financial Tower. I was methodically working my way down from the executive suite, cataloging resources and mapping escape routes. The 48th floor was corporate accounting, cubicles, conference rooms, the usual setup. I was checking the break room for supplies when I heard it, a wet, shuffling sound coming from the central office area. I froze, listening. My years of working in precarious positions had taught me to be still, to assess before moving. The sound continued, accompanied by the low, guttural moaning. Following my own rules, I quickly identified my escape options: the stairwell behind me, a maintenance access panel in the ceiling, and the route through the executive bathroom I'd already secured. Moving silently, I crept to the break room door and peered through the narrow window. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. The emergency coordinator, the same woman whose security pass I now carried, was wandering among the cubicles. Up close, the transformation was horrifying. Her skin had a grayish pallor with black veins visible beneath the surface. Her movements were jerky but purposeful. Most disturbing were her eyes, clouded over with a milky film, but still somehow tracking movement. She was wearing her emergency coordinator vest over a blood-soaked blouse. The security badge I now carried must have been a duplicate or backup. As I watched, she bumped into a desk, then methodically began opening its drawers one by one, as if searching for something. That level of coordination was unexpected. The reports had described mindless aggression, not methodical behavior. I needed to retreat, but my curiosity got the better of me. What was she looking for? How much of her human intelligence remained? I decided to test her awareness. Using my multi-tool, I carefully loosened a ceiling vent on the far side of the office. When it clattered to the floor, her reaction was immediate and chilling. Her head snapped toward the sound, and she moved with surprising speed toward it, not running, but a rapid, determined walk. She reached the fallen vent and crouched, examining it. Then slowly she lifted her head and began scanning the room, as if understanding the vent hadn't fallen on its own. That was my cue to leave. I backed silently toward the stairwell, following my escape plan. As I reached for the door handle, my elbow bumped a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. The small noise, barely audible to my ears, was enough. She turned, spotting me instantly, and let out a sound I'll never forget, not a scream or a growl, but something in between, a sound of recognition and hunger. She charged, moving faster than seemed possible given her jerky gait. I slipped through the stairwell door, touching the frame 3 times by pure instinct. Even in that moment of terror, it might have saved my life. That brief pause gave me time to secure the door behind me with a zip tie through the crash bar, a temporary measure that wouldn't hold for long, but would slow her down. Through the small window, I watched her reach the door and begin slamming against it. She was trying the handle, understanding how doors worked. Then, most disturbingly, she removed her own security badge and began trying to scan it, just as she had at the executive floor. When that failed, she resumed battering the door. I didn't wait to see more. I climbed the stairs quickly, putting distance between us. Her calls echoed in the stairwell. becoming more distorted and animalistic as I ascended. By the time I reached the executive floor sanctuary, they had faded completely. That encounter taught me several crucial things about the infected. They retained basic problem-solving abilities. They understood tools and how to use them. They responded primarily to sound rather than sight. And most importantly, their coordination and speed decreased at higher elevations. On the 40th floor, she had been quick but clumsy. I recalled the infected I'd observed at street level move with much more fluidity and speed. The next morning, I conducted a careful experiment. Using the building's security cameras and the CEO's access terminal, I observed the infected woman's movements. She had returned to the accounting floor, moving aimlessly among the cubicles. I remotely activated a phone in a distant corner. Her reaction time was noticeably slower than the day before. Something about the height was affecting her. This observation became the foundation of my 30th floor rule. Above the 30th floor, infected moved slower, seemed less coordinated, and appeared to have difficulty with complex tasks. Above the 60th floor, they could barely function. This knowledge shaped all my future planning. With this information, I began transforming the executive suite into a more sustainable sanctuary. The CEO's office became my planning center. I pushed furniture against non-essential doors, leaving only one access point that I could monitor easily. I transformed the conference room into a sleep area, building a platform near the ceiling using bookshelves and boardroom tables, keeping to my lifelong habit of sleeping elevated. The private executive bathroom became my hygiene station. The small kitchenette served as both food storage and water processing center. I rigged a system to collect and filter additional water from the HVAC system, supplementing the dwindling supply in the rooftop tanks. From the executive suite windows, I had a commanding view of downtown Chicago. Using the CEO's binoculars, I mapped potential routes to adjacent buildings. The nearest was the Westbrook Tower, a mere 15 meters away, challenging but feasible with my equipment. I spent a full day planning that first crossing. The margin for error was zero. One mistake meant falling to the infected-filled streets below. I calculated wind factors, tested anchor points, and triple-checked every knot and carabiner. At dawn, when the light was good but the sun not yet high enough to impair visibility, I made my first crossing. Standing at the broken window of the Chicago Financial Tower, safety harness secure, ropes rigged, I faced the greatest mental challenge of my life. Below me was certain death. Ahead was unknown territory that might contain its own dangers. Behind me was a sanctuary with dwindling supplies. I stepped out onto the narrow window-washing platform, then off it entirely, suspended nearly 70 stories above the ground by equipment never designed for this purpose. The wind was stronger than expected, creating a swing that threatened my trajectory. I compensated using techniques from my years of industrial climbing, moving hand over hand along the primary line, safety backup secure. The crossing took 7 minutes that felt like hours. When my feet touched the window ledge of the Westbrook Tower, I allowed myself 3 seconds of relief before focusing on the new challenge, getting inside. The Westbrook's windows were different, tempered, designed to prevent break-ins. My glass cutter was ineffective. After 15 precarious minutes on the ledge, I located a maintenance hatch used by window washing crews. My universal key, part of my professional equipment, granted access. I entered the Westbrook cautiously, alert for infected. The floor was deserted, an architectural firm, judging by the drafting tables and scale models. I conducted a methodical sweep, securing doors and checking stairwells. Clear. This would become my second sanctuary. The Westbrook offered new resources: bottled water, non-perishable food, first aid supplies, and most valuably, technical equipment. The architectural firm had powerful laptops, external batteries, and even a small drone used for building surveys. I spent hours transferring the most valuable supplies back to my primary sanctuary in the financial tower. That night, reviewing my successful expansion, I found the CEO's emergency protocols again. The section about Skybridge access mentioned 3 connected buildings with executive-level walkways, secret passages between the most powerful offices in Chicago. These weren't on any public blueprints, but according to the document, they existed between the financial tower, the Metropolitan National Bank building, and the Chicago Commerce Center. The Metropolitan was too far for a direct rope crossing, nearly 50 meters across a plaza. But if these secret bridges existed, they would expand my territory exponentially. The access codes were listed in the protocol document. If they still worked, if the bridges still existed, I could establish a triangle of safe territories. The next morning, I located the hidden door mentioned in the protocols, disguised as a wood-paneled wall in the executive bathroom. The keypad was dead due to power failures, but the manual override key worked. The door swung open, revealing a narrow carpeted corridor lit by emergency lights, a skybridge just as described, connecting directly to the Metropolitan's executive floor. I crossed cautiously, alert for any sign of infected. The bridge was clear, sealed at both ends with security doors. The Metropolitan's executive floor was undisturbed, showing no signs of violence or infection. Another sanctuary to add to my growing territory. Over the next 5 days, I established a network of 7 connected buildings. Each new building followed the same protocol: secure entry, methodical sweep, resource collection, establishing escape routes, mapping safe zones. I created my first crude map on architectural paper taken from the Westbrook, marking each building, each connection, each resource cage. I began marking my routes with specific symbols using my glass etching tools. Small, nearly invisible markings that indicated safe paths, hazards, resources. It became a coded language only I understood: arrows indicating direction, crosses marking danger zones, circles showing water sources, triangles for food stores. My vertical world expanded, but the physical toll was mounting. Constant climbing, carrying supplies between buildings, maintaining vigilance, it was exhausting. I established a routine, alternating rest days with expansion days. On rest days, I'd observe the city below, documenting infected movement patterns and updating my maps. It was on one such observation day that I first noticed something unusual. From my vantage point atop the Metropolitan, I spotted movement on a distant rooftop. Not the jerky motion of infected, but the purposeful activity of survivors. Using the architectural firm's high-powered survey telescope, I confirmed what I was seeing. A group of people had created a rooftop garden on the Lakeside Residences Tower, approximately half a mile east. I spent hours observing them, counting 7 individuals. They had established what appeared to be a functional community: container gardens, rainwater collection systems, solar panels, even a small wind turbine. They had transformed their rooftop into a sustainable outpost. The discovery sent conflicting emotions through me. Relief at finding other survivors. Hope that organized resistance existed. But also wariness: were they trustworthy? Would they try to take what I had established? My isolation had kept me safe, but the sight of other people made me realize how desperately lonely I'd become. After 2 days of observation, I decided to initiate contact. Using a signal mirror, I flashed the universal SOS pattern toward their rooftop during peak sunlight hours. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. Within minutes, they responded with the same pattern. That evening, we established basic communication using high-powered flashlights and simple Morse code. They identified themselves as residents from the building's upper floors who had barricaded access points when the infection hit. Their group included a doctor, an engineer, and several people with practical skills. We arranged a meeting on neutral territory, the rooftop of the Chicago Commerce Center, roughly halfway between our positions. I insisted on establishing my own independent route there, maintaining control of my escape options. Trust was a luxury none of us could afford in this new world. The meeting was set for noon the following day. I spent the night preparing, selecting which information to share and what to withhold. My instincts told me to maintain some secrets: not all of my routes, not all of my supply caches. I would be friendly but guarded. As I prepared for first contact with other survivors, I reminded myself of the rule I'd established: never reveal all your routes to anyone. It seemed paranoid, but that rule would save my life in the weeks that followed. I had no idea then that I would soon break that rule for a family trapped in the Metropolitan Tower, a decision that would ultimately lead me to this farmhouse, recording what might be my final testimony. But before I encountered the Lakeside group, I made another discovery that would reshape my understanding of our situation. While exploring the Metropolitan's executive suite, I found a private meeting room with the bank's board numbers still inside, or what remained of them. Unlike the infected I'd encountered, these individuals appeared to have committed suicide. A boardroom table with 9 bodies, each with a bullet wound to the head, a single gun in the center. What happened here? I searched the room for clues. The boardroom's large screen still displayed the last presentation, a confidential CDC briefing about the Chicago containment scenario. The documents described the infection as a prion-based pathogen that originated from the city's water treatment facility. The affected displayed graduated symptoms based on exposure levels and elevation. Most crucially, the briefing emphasized that the military's containment strategy was not evacuation, but isolation. Chicago was being written off, a sacrifice zone to prevent wider contamination. No rescue was coming, no aid, no evacuation. The city and everyone in it had been abandoned. I photographed the documents using my phone. Though networks were down, there was no one to send them to. The knowledge was both devastating and clarifying. I was truly on my own. We all were. Whatever community existed now would have to be built by survivors. With this grim reality in mind, I approached the meeting with the Lakeside group cautiously. I established 3 separate escape routes from the meeting point, hidden equipment caches along each path, and observation posts to ensure I wasn't being followed. The Chicago Commerce Center's rooftop helipad served as our neutral meeting ground. I arrived an hour early, securing positions and confirming the area was clear of infected. At precisely noon, I spotted 3 figures emerging from the rooftop access door. 2 men and a woman, all armed but with weapons holstered. I identified myself using the flashlight signal we'd established. They responded correctly. Slowly, maintaining distance, we approached each other in the center of the helipad. "I'm Dr. Elena Reyes," the woman said, extending her hand. "This is Marcus, our security, and Raj, our engineer. We've been watching you move between buildings. Impressive system you've created." I shook her hand cautiously. "Winslow. People call me Slick. Former window washer, current high-rise nomad." Marcus, a tall man with military bearing, studied me carefully. "You've been busy. We've counted you in at least 5 different buildings. Always above the 30th floor, always using rope systems. Smart." I nodded, not confirming or denying the exact number. "The infected are slower at height, less coordinated. Above the 60th floor, they can barely function." Dr. Rice's eyes widened. "You've noticed the elevation effect, too. We've been documenting the same phenomenon. The higher up, the less acute the symptoms. Do you understand why?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about the CDC documents I discovered. "I have theories, nothing concrete." Raj, the engineer, stepped forward. "We've established a community on the upper 15 floors of Lakeside. 23 survivors. Sustainable food production, water purification, solar power. We've been isolated, but we're trying to connect with other survivor groups." "How did you establish contact with other buildings?" I asked. "Light signals primarily," Marcus replied. "We've identified 4 other rooftop communities within visual range. Approximately 80 survivors total spread across downtown. We're working on a more reliable communication system." Dr. Reyes studied me intently. "Your rope systems could change everything. Right now, each building is an island. If we could move between structures safely, we could share resources, knowledge, maybe even begin reclaiming the city floor by floor." I considered her words carefully. The potential for a larger community was tempting, but risks remained. "I work alone for a reason. It's safer. For you." "Maybe," Marcus countered. "But what about the people trapped in buildings without roof access? Without your skills? We've seen them, signaling from windows, hanging banners asking for help. They're running out of food, water." His words hit hard. In my focus on my own survival, I've been deliberately ignoring the signs of other survivors, the SOS signals, the window messages, people trapped, dying slowly while I moved freely through my vertical kingdom. "Give me time to think about it," I finally said. I'm not refusing, just cautious. We exchanged basic information, their numbers, resources, needs, my observations about infected behavior, safe route criteria, building access techniques. The meeting lasted 30 minutes, no more. We agreed to daily signal check-ins and another meeting in 3 days. As we prepared to go our separate ways, Dr. Reyes handed me a small radio. Short range only. For emergencies. We're on Channel 3 at noon each day. I accepted it cautiously, not mentioning that I'd already collected several similar devices. 3 days, I confirmed, then departed using a route different from my arrival path. That night, in my financial tower sanctuary, I processed what I'd learned. Other organized survivors existed. A network was forming. My skills gave me unique value in this new world. But questions remained. Could I trust them? Should I integrate with their community or maintain my independence? The decision was made for me the next morning. While observing the Metropolitan Tower through my telescope, I spotted movement on the 42nd floor, not infected, but a small group of survivors, including a child. They had hung a white sheet from the window with a desperate message. Trey PED. No food. Help. They had barricaded themselves in what appeared to be a corner office. From their gestures and the makeshift signs they held up to the window, I gathered they had been trapped for at least 2 weeks. Their situation was dire. The Metropolitan was part of my network, but I had only secured the executive floors. The 42nd floor would require navigating potentially infected-filled stairwells or elevator shafts. A rescue would be risky, maybe suicidal. But watching that child's face through the telescope, I couldn't turn away. I broke my own rule. I used the emergency radio. Lakeside, this is Slick. I've spotted survivors trapped in the metropolitan 42nd floor. I'm going in, but could use backup. The response was immediate. Understood. 2 team members heading to your position. How will we find you? I hesitated only briefly. Look for the glass markings, arrows etched near access points. Follow them to the executive floor of the financial tower. I'll meet you there. With that decision, I changed everything. By sharing my marking system, I was no longer completely independent. By mounting a rescue, I was accepting responsibility for others. By making contact with the lakeside community, I was becoming part of something larger than myself. Little did I know that this rescue mission would set in motion a chain of events leading to discoveries about the infection's origin, the military's true plans, and ultimately to my current situation, trapped in this farmhouse attic, surrounded by a new evolving threat. I waited for Marcus and Raj at the executive entrance to the Chicago Financial Tower, my mind racing through rescue scenarios for the Trout family. Within 20 minutes they arrived, having followed my glass etchings perfectly. They were equipped with climbing gear, weapons, and medical supplies. Whatever reservations I had about the lakeside community, they clearly took rescue operations seriously. The Metropolitan's 42nd floor, I explained, laying out my building blueprints. Corner office on the northeast side. 4 survivors visible, including 1 child. They'd barricaded themselves in, but they're out of supplies. Marcus examined my maps with a professional eye. You've marked the infected concentration points. Smart. How current is this information? 12 hours old. I did daily sweeps of all connected buildings. I traced our potential routes with my finger. The executive skybridge gets us into the Metropolitan's top floors. From there, we have 3 options: the emergency stairwell, the elevator shaft, or the external window washing tracks. Raj studied the external option. Your specialty, I take it. I nodded. Fastest but most exposed. 20-story external descent in daylight. Stairwells? Marcus asked. Unpredictable. I've encountered infected as high as the 48th floor. They're slower up here but still dangerous. And they're learning to use the stairs efficiently. We settled on the elevator shaft, the most controllable environment. The cards were frozen in place, creating platforms we could use during our descent. I gathered my specialized equipment: ropes, harnesses, headlamps, glass-cutting tools. Within 30 minutes, we were crossing the executive skybridge to the Metropolitan. The Metropolitan's executive floor was as I'd left it, secure and untouched. We moved silently to the elevator bank. Using maintenance keys from my collection, I opened the shaft access panels. The elevator car was stopped 10 floors below. The shaft stretched down into darkness, emergency lights creating pools of dim red illumination at each level. I'll lead, I said, securing my primary line to a structural beam. 10-meter intervals. Communicate with hand signals unless absolutely necessary. The shaft amplifies sound. The descent was methodical. We moved from the 60th floor down the dark shaft, the smell of grease and dust thick in the air. At each floor, I paused, listening for movement beyond the doors. The higher floors remained silent. As we passed the 50th floor, I began detecting sounds: shuffling, moaning, the occasional bang against elevator doors. At the 45th floor, we encountered our first real obstacle. An infected maintenance worker was inside the shaft, caught between the elevator car and the wall. He became active as our lights hit him, twisting toward us with horrible broken movements. Marcus handled it efficiently, a silent takedown with a carbon fiber rod. We reached the 42nd floor without further incident. The elevator doors were partially open, creating a narrow gap. I peered through, checking the hallway. Clear, but with clear signs of violence: blood smears, abandoned belongings, a wheelchair overturned. Using specialized tools, we widened the gap enough to slip through. The office floor was dark, emergency lights flickering. We moved in tight formation toward the northeast corner. Marcus took point, weapon ready. Raj carried the medical and supply packs. I kept my climbing picks in hand, not ideal weapons, but effective in close quarters. We encountered 2 infected in the maze of cubicles, office workers in torn business attire. Their movements were sluggish at this elevation, just as I'd observed previously. We avoided direct confrontation, using distraction techniques to move them away from our path. The corner office was barricaded with desks, filing cabinets, and chairs, an impressive fortress constructed from office furniture. A handwritten sign was taped to the barrier. Alive inside. Infected, stay back. I knocked gently on the barricade in a deliberate pattern. 3 quick, 3 slow, 3 quick. SOS. A tense silence followed, then a cautious voice from inside. Who's there? Are you real people? Rescue team, Marcus answered. 3 of us. We saw your window sign. We're here to get you out. After a brief, whispered conversation inside, they began dismantling part of their barricade. The gap revealed 4 survivors, a man, a woman, a teenage boy, and a girl no more than 8 years old. They were thin, dehydrated, clearly at the end of their resources. The man, who introduced himself as David Chen, explained their situation in a hoarse voice. We were in a client meeting when everything went crazy. Barricaded ourselves in here. Had some snacks, water cooler, bathroom access. Been trapped for 18 days. The last of our water ran out yesterday. His wife, Jennifer, hugged their daughter tightly. We tried reaching the roof, but the stairwells were full of those things. We've been signaling for days. The daughter clung to a notebook, drawing continuously as we helped them pack the few belongings worth taking. I noticed she kept drawing the same pattern over and over. 3 connected towers with exit at specific points. When I asked her about it, Jennifer quickly took the drawing away. That's when I first suspected some survivors knew more than they were sharing. The return journey would be challenging. The survivors were weak, and the little girl was terrified of the elevator shaft. We modified our plan. Marcus and I would create a secure route through the emergency stairwell, clearing it floor by floor. Raj would protect the family until our return. The stairwell operation took nearly 2 hours. We encountered 14 infected across 20 floors, dispatching them silently when necessary, barricading doors where possible. By late afternoon, we had established a clear path from the 42nd floor to the executive level. We moved the family carefully, the little girl riding on Marcus's shoulders. David carried their essential belongings, across the skybridge, through my network of secure passages, back to the financial tower's executive sanctuary. The relief on their faces when they reached safety was overwhelming. While Raj and Marcus attended to the family's immediate medical needs, I prepared a meal for my supplies. As they ate ravenously, they shared their story. David was an investment banker, Jennifer, a pediatrician. The teenager, Michael, was their son. The little girl, Lucy, was their daughter. What's happening out there? David asked between mouthfuls. Is help coming? The military? Anyone? I exchanged glances with Marcus and Raj. The truth would be devastating, but they deserved to know. Chicago is quarantined, I explained, showing them the CDC documents I'd salvaged. No one is coming. The official strategy is containment, not rescue. Jennifer studied the documents with her medical training. This says it's a prion disease, not a virus, transmitted through the water supply. She looked up sharply. Have you been drinking the tap water? No, I assured her. Only bottled water and filtered rainwater. I noticed the connection to the water treatment facility early on. Smart man, she nodded. This explains the elevation effect too. Water pressure would create different concentration levels at different heights. Higher floors would receive lower prion concentrations. This confirmation of my observations was chilling. The infection wasn't random. It was systematically distributed through the city's infrastructure. Jennifer's explanation of the scientific mechanism behind what I'd observed made the pattern clear. That night, the Chen family slept in the conference room I'd converted to living quarters. They were the first guests in my sanctuary, bringing a strange domesticity to my solitary existence. Lucy's drawing disturbed me, though. When the others slept, I examined it more closely. The 3 towers she'd drawn matched the executive skybridge network exactly. Information a child shouldn't have. The next morning, Marcus contacted the Lakeside community via radio. They arranged for a larger team to help relocate the Chen family to their settlement. Before departing, Jennifer pulled me aside. Lucy has dreams, she whispered. Since this started, she draws what she sees, buildings, connections, safe places, things she couldn't know. She pressed a folded paper into my hand. She drew this for you, said you'll need it. The drawing showed a building I recognized, the East Bank Tower, with a detailed route marked through its interior, leading to what appeared to be a laboratory. At the bottom, in childish handwriting, the water people are here. I tucked the drawing into my notebook without comment. Whether it was coincidence, imagination, or something more unsettling, I couldn't dismiss it entirely. The world had changed. Why not children with strange perceptions? With the Chen family safely escorted to Lakeside, I returned to my solitary routine, But something had shifted. The successful rescue operation demonstrated what cooperation could achieve. More importantly, Jennifer's confirmation of the water-based transmission and elevation effects validated my survival strategy. Height wasn't just safer, it was fundamental protection against the pathogen itself. Over the next week, I expanded my cooperation with the lakeside community, though I maintained my independence. I trained small teams in my rope techniques, establishing safe routes between 3 additional buildings. In exchange, they shared their resources: food from their rooftop gardens, medical supplies, and most importantly, information. Dr. Reyes, the lakeside leader, invited me to a community meeting. Reluctantly, I accepted, making the crossing to their settlement using one of my newly established routes. The lakeside residences had been transformed from a luxury apartment building into a functional vertical village. The upper 15 floors housed 23 survivors, with elaborate systems for sustainability. The rooftop held container gardens growing vegetables and herbs. Several floors had been converted to specific purposes: hydroponic farming, water purification, medical facilities, communal dining. Solar panels and small wind turbines provided limited electricity. Most impressive was the rainwater collection system, which captured, filtered, and distributed water throughout their living spaces. Their community structure was organized and democratic. Dr. Rees served as their leader, with expertise teams handling specific needs: security, medical, engineering, food production. They held regular meetings to address issues and make decisions collectively. The meeting I attended focused on expanding their network to other survivor communities. Maps displayed on the walls showed 7 confirmed survivor settlements across downtown Chicago, with estimated total population of 83. My rope systems were central to their plans for connecting these isolated groups. With SLIC's techniques, we can establish safe passages between communities, Dr. Reyes explained. Share resources, knowledge, eventually begin reclaiming the city floor by floor. Their ambition was both inspiring and concerning. Reclaiming the city seemed impossible given what we knew about the infection. Yet their organization and determination were impressive. After the meeting, Dr. Reyes showed me their quarantine protocol. 3 people locked in a maintenance level, each showing early symptoms of infection, but not yet turned. They claimed it was precautionary isolation, but I heard screams at night that suggested more invasive study. We're monitoring the progression, Dr. Reyes explained clinically. Jennifer's prion theory suggests the possibility of developing resistance protocols, maybe even treatments. I kept my reservations to myself. The lakeside community was doing what they believed necessary for survival, for finding solutions. But the screams from their quarantine level haunted me. During my 2-day stay at Lakeside, I observed their operations, learning their systems while sharing my own expertise. I taught basic rope techniques to their security team, established standardized route markers between buildings, and helped design safety protocols for interbuilding travel. On the evening before my departure, while observing from their rooftop, military helicopters circled the water treatment facility again. This had become a regular occurrence. Every few days, military aircraft would conduct what appeared to be survey operations around the plant. One survivor, a former CDC worker named Sophia, went pale when she saw them. As others continued their conversations, Sophia pulled me aside. "They're not monitoring," she whispered urgently. "They're collecting samples. The treatment plant wasn't contaminated by accident." She slipped me a key card with the CDC logo. Coordinates are on the back. "There's a mobile lab near the University Medical Center. The truth is there. What this really is, why Chicago was sacrificed." Before I could question her further, she rejoined the group, acting as if our exchange never happened. I examined the key card later in private. The coordinates matched a location about 3 miles west of downtown, within the quarantine zone but outside my current network. That night, I considered my options. The CDC lab might contain crucial information about the outbreak, but reaching it would require traveling far beyond my established safe zone, likely involving ground-level movement. The risk was enormous. Lucy's drawing came to mind: the East Bank Tower and its supposed laboratory. Perhaps there was a connection to what Sophie had hinted at. I decided to investigate the East Bank first, as it was within my network's reach. The next morning, I bid farewell to the lakeside community, promising continued cooperation while maintaining my independent operations. I returned to the financial tower, my primary sanctuary, to plan my East Bank expedition. 2 days later, I was preparing my equipment when the emergency radio crackled to life. Marcus's voice, urgent and strained: "Slick, Lakeside to Slick. Emergency. East Bank is compromised. Repeat, East Bank is compromised. Multiple infected breached their barricades. Need immediate assistance with evacuation. I grabbed my gear and moved quickly to my observation point. Through the telescope, I could see the disaster unfolding. The East Bank Tower's lower floors were swarming with infected. Survivors were visible on the roof, signaling desperately for help. The lakeside security team was attempting to establish a rope line from an adjacent building, but the distance was too great for their equipment. I radioed back, en route. Maintain position. I'll approach from the south side. Using my most direct route, I crossed to the Chicago Commerce Center, then to the Metropolitan, establishing a path that could reach the East Bank from its most vulnerable point. As I worked, I maintained visual contact with the unfolding tragedy. The infected were moving methodically through the building floor by floor. This wasn't random. It was coordinated, strategic. They were hunting. Through my binoculars, I observed something impossible. Some infected were wearing climbing gear, not just wearing it, using it. Basic climbing techniques, harnesses, carabiners. When I shared this observation with Marcus via radio, his response was telling. Confirmed. We'd seen the same. They're adapting. Get here fast. By the time I reached the final crossing point, the situation had deteriorated further. The infected had reached the East Bank's 55th floor. Survivors were retreating to the roof, their escape options dwindling. I established my line to their position, creating the longest single crossing I'd attempted yet, nearly 70 meters across open air. I made the crossing in record time, the urgency overwhelming my usual caution. When I reached the East Bank roof, 22 survivors awaited evacuation. More than I'd anticipated, far more than my line could safely transport quickly enough. The lakeside team arrived minutes later, adding their equipment to mine. We established 3 separate lines to different buildings, creating multiple evacuation routes. The survivors were terrified but followed our instructions precisely, moving across the lines and harnesses we improvised from available materials. 16 survivors were evacuated successfully. The infected reached the roof access as we were preparing the final group. What followed was chaos. The infected moved with disturbing coordination, targeting our anchor points rather than individuals. They understood our escape mechanism and were deliberately attacking it. In the confusion, lines were cut. People fell. Screams echoed across the vertical canyons between buildings. I managed to secure a secondary line for 4 more survivors, but 2 were lost in the process. As the roof was overrun, I had no choice but to cut the final access line, stranding the remaining infected on the East Bank roof. The survivors we rescued were relocated to various settlements based on capacity and immediate medical needs. 6 went to Lakeside, 4 to the metropolitan community, the others distributed among smaller outposts. The loss of East Bank Tower, a major settlement with extensive supplies, was devastating to the fragile network of survivors. More disturbing was what we had witnessed. Infected using tools, coordinating attacks, adapting strategies. They were evolving, learning. When I mentioned my observations to the Lakeside Security Council, the reaction was immediate and alarming. Marcus locked away all climbing equipment and posted guards at their supply room. He knew something he wasn't sharing. That evening, reviewing the day's events in my sanctuary, I recalled Sophia's warning and Lucy's drawing. The East Bank had fallen, but according to Lucy's sketch, there was something important there. A laboratory that might hold answers. With the building now overrun, that information was likely lost. Or was it? The drawing showed a specific route through the building's interior, leading to what appeared to be a sub-level laboratory. If I could find a way back in, avoid the infected concentration, perhaps the answers remained accessible. It would be a suicide mission by any reasonable assessment. Yet the patterns I was observing, the military's continuing interest in the water treatment facility, the organized behavior of the infected, Sophia's hints about intentional contamination, suggested a larger truth that needed to be uncovered. That night, I made the decision that would ultimately lead me to this farmhouse, recording what might be my final message. I would attempt to infiltrate the fallen East Bank Tower, locate the laboratory Lucy had drawn, and discover what secrets it held. Little did I know that what I would find there would change everything, revealing the true nature of the infection, the government's role in its release, and most critically, why some infected were evolving while others weren't. Information that would make me a target for forces beyond the mindless hordes below. I checked my equipment one final time, preparing for what might be my most dangerous expedition yet. The CDC keycard Sophia had given me was secure in my vest pocket. Lucy's drawing was folded in my waterproof notebook. Whatever awaited in the East Bank laboratory, I was determined to uncover it. Before departing, I left a sealed envelope in my sanctuary, addressed to Dr. Reyes at Lakeside. Inside was a complete map of my route network, supply caches, and safe houses, information I had never fully shared with anyone. If I didn't return, at least my knowledge wouldn't die with me. In this new world, information was as valuable as any resource. Dawn was approaching, the optimal time to move. Infected were typically less active in early morning hours. I touched the doorframe 3 times, a ritual that no longer seemed superstitious but necessary, and set out toward the fallen tower, unaware that what I would discover there would set in motion the events leading to my current predicament. The infiltration of East Bank Tower remains the most dangerous operation I've attempted since the outbreak began. I approached from the south using a maintenance entrance on the 52nd floor, a blind spot I identified during previous observations. The building had fallen just 24 hours earlier, and I hoped the infected would still be concentrated on the upper levels where the final survivors had been cornered. I entered through an external vent system, a tight passage barely wide enough for my frame. Years of climbing had made me lean and flexible, perfect for spaces designed for maintenance access rather than human travel. The passage opened into a utility room filled with electrical panels and network servers. According to Lucy's drawing, the laboratory would be 5 floors down, in what was marked on official blueprints as storage space. Moving through the darkened building required every stealth technique I developed. I could hear the infected moving about, some floors above, others disturbingly close. Their movements had purpose, patterns that suggested rudimentary organization. They were searching, not just wandering. The stairwells were too dangerous, likely to be patrolled by the infected. Instead, I used maintenance ladders within the building's mechanical shafts, vertical passages housing electrical, conduits, plumbing, ventilation. These narrow spaces were uncomfortable but provided secure passage between floors. At the 47th floor, I encountered my first major obstacle. The access panel to the mechanical shaft was jammed from the other side. I'd have to exit the safety of the shaft and find an alternate route down. I listened carefully, hearing nothing from the immediate vicinity, then carefully removed the panel to an closet. The floor was a standard corporate office layout: cubicles, conference rooms, break areas. Evidence of violence was everywhere: overturned furniture, blood smears, personal items abandoned in panic. I moved silently through the space, mapping each potential exit point. The southern stairwell seemed least disturbed. I approached it cautiously, testing the door handle without opening it, listening for movement beyond. Silence. But silence could be deceptive. I opened the door a crack, just enough to verify the stairwell was clear for at least one visible flight. Satisfied, I slipped through, touching the frame 3 times by ingrained habit. The stairwell was emergency lit with dim red bulbs, creating pools of visibility separated by near darkness. I descended carefully, pausing at each landing to listen before proceeding. 2 floors down, I froze. Voices. Not the animalistic moaning of standard infected, but something approaching speech. Guttural, slurred, but with cadence and response patterns. Communication between infected. I never witnessed this before, though Marcus had mentioned observing similar behavior in recent days. I pressed against the wall, controlling my breathing. From my vantage point through the railing, I could see them. 3 infected in the business attire of office workers, but moving with unnatural coordination. They were examining a door, testing the handle, then taking turns attempting to force it open. Most disturbing was their appearance. Unlike the gray skin and black veins of typical infected, these individuals showed less external degradation. Their movements were more fluid, almost natural. Only their eyes, clouded with that characteristic milky film, marked them definitively as infected. I remained motionless for 11 minutes as they worked at the door. Eventually, they forced it open and moved through, their slurred vocalizations fading as they proceeded. I waited another 5 minutes before continuing my descent, now even more cautious. At the 42nd floor, the level indicated in Lucy's drawing, I faced a new challenge. The floor was partially flooded. A sprinkler system had activated during the chaos, and water pooled several inches deep throughout the space. Considering what we now knew about waterborne transmission, this was potentially disastrous. I secured my boots with additional waterproof wrapping from my pack and proceeded carefully along elevated surfaces, desks, filing cabinets, anything to avoid direct contact with the potentially contaminated water. The laboratory, according to Lucy's drawing, would be in the northeast corner, behind what appeared on standard blueprints as storage closets. Navigating the flooded floor was slow, meticulous work. Twice I was forced to change route when I encountered infected. These were standard variants, slower, less coordinated than those I'd observed in the stairwell. Their degradation appeared more advanced, movements more erratic. They splashed through the water without concern, seemingly unbothered by its presence. After 40 minutes of careful movement, I reached the northeast section. One official blueprints marked as storage was actually a reinforced door with keycard access, exactly as drawn in Lucy's crude sketch. The card reader was dark, power having failed days ago. However, most security systems included mechanical override options for emergency scenarios. I examined the door carefully, locating a small panel near the base that concealed a manual lock cylinder. Using my collection of maintenance keys, I worked methodically through possible matches until finding one that engaged the mechanism. The door unlocked with a heavy click that seemed thunderous in the silence. Beyond was no storage closet, but a sophisticated laboratory. Emergency power remained active here, apparently connected to an independent system. Low-level lighting illuminated workstations, medical equipment, and most surprisingly, a series of sealed containment units along the far wall. The lab showed no signs of hurried evacuation. Everything remained in place: computers, equipment, research materials. Unlike the chaos throughout the rest of the building, this space appeared to have been deliberately preserved. A sanctuary of information amid the destruction. I approached the nearest workstation and activated the computer. To my surprise, it powered up, requesting login credentials. The CDC keycard Sophia had given me was worth trying. I inserted it into the reader, and the system granted immediate access. What I discovered in those files confirmed our worst fears and revealed truths even more disturbing. Project documentation, research notes, test results, all pointing to the same conclusion. The Chicago outbreak wasn't an accident. It was a controlled release of an engineered pathogen, designated compound BLU-47. According to the files, the BLU-47 was a modified prion designed for waterborne transmission, created as part of a classified bioweapon development program. Chicago had been selected as a limited field test environment because of its isolated water supply system and vertical urban density. The quarantine wasn't a response to an outbreak, it was pre-planned containment for a deliberate release. Most disturbing were the research parameters. The primary focus wasn't lethality but cognitive impacts, specifically how the prion affected higher brain functions, motor control, and capacity for organized behavior. They were studying how infected hosts could be directed, controlled. The files contained detailed observation notes on different infection patterns correlated with exposure methods, concentrations, and environmental factors. Subjects exposed through water at standard municipal pressure demonstrated classic infected behavior: aggressive, minimally coordinated, driven by base impulses. But subjects exposed to specific concentrated formulations maintained higher cognitive functions while still exhibiting the aggression and pack mentality of standard infected. The project's ultimate goal was chilling, development of a pathogen that could create controllable hosts, human bodies with compromised higher reasoning but retained physical capabilities and basic task execution abilities, soldiers who wouldn't question orders, workers who wouldn't resist exploitation, a controllable underclass created through selective infection. I photographed key documents using my phone, downloading what files I could to a portable drive I carried. This information needed to reach the surviving communities, however dangerous its implications might be. The containment units along the wall drew my attention next. 5 sealed chambers, each containing what appeared to be a human subject. 4 showed no signs of life, bodies in advanced stages of decomposition. But the 5th contained a living subject, a man in his 40s, strapped to a medical bed, with intravenous lines connected to monitoring equipment. He was conscious, eyes tracking my movement as I approached. Unlike the infected, his eyes were clear, aware. When he saw me, he began struggling against his restraints, trying to communicate through what appeared to be a breathing mask covering his lower face. After ensuring the containment seal was secure, I examined the monitoring panel. The subject, identified as Test Case 37, was being administered controlled doses of the prion alongside what appeared to be an experimental counteragent. According to the logs, he had maintained cognitive function despite massive exposure levels. A potential treatment protocol was being tested. I considered my options. Releasing him was dangerous. He could be infectious, unstable, or even part of the research team responsible for this atrocity. Yet leaving a conscious human being trapped as the building was overrun by infected, seemed equally unconscionable. The decision was made for me. Alarms suddenly blared throughout the lab. On the security monitors, I could see infected converging on the laboratory from multiple directions. They moved with disturbing coordination, as if responding to the alarm with tactical awareness. Someone or something had triggered a security protocol. I had minutes, perhaps seconds, to gather what information I could and find escape. I downloaded the treatment protocol data and collected physical samples of the counteragent vials. Test Case 37 became increasingly agitated, his eyes conveying desperate pleas. In a split-second decision, I engaged the emergency medical evacuation sequence on his containment unit. The system initiated a rapid decontamination cycle, then unlocked his restraints. I couldn't wait to see if he could function independently. The infected had reached the outer doors. I retreated to my planned escape route, a maintenance shaft that would lead to the building's external drainage system. As I sealed myself in the shaft, I heard the laboratory doors breach. Through the narrow ventilation slits, I glimpsed something extraordinary. The infected weren't attacking Test Case 37. They were responding to his gestures, organizing around him. He wasn't their victim. He appeared to be directing them. I didn't wait to see more. I descended through the drainage infrastructure, eventually emerging 3 floors down where I could access the building's exterior. Using my climbing equipment, I created an emergency descent line and rappelled 20 stories to a lower roof level where I'd established an escape route prior to infiltration. The knowledge I'd acquired was devastating. The infection was engineered, the quarantine was planned, and most terrifying, some infected retained enough cognition to potentially control others. Test Case 37 wasn't a victim of the research. He appeared to be its culmination. I made my way back to my sanctuary in the financial tower, documenting everything I'd discovered. The implications were clear. Whatever government agency had orchestrated this hadn't lost control of the situation. They were observing its progression, perhaps even directing certain aspects from outside the quarantine zone. The military's regular helicopter patrols around the water treatment plant suddenly made sense. They weren't monitoring contamination. They were collecting performance data on their weapon in an urban environment. I faced an impossible dilemma. Sharing this information with the survivor communities would cause panic, destroying the fragile cooperation networks we'd established. But withholding it might doom them to becoming unwitting test subjects in this monstrous experiment. That night, as I considered my options, Dr. Reyes contacted me via emergency radio. Her voice was tense, controlled. "Slick, we have a situation. The CDC woman, Sophia, is gone. Her rope was found cut on the 32nd floor, just below our safe zone. And she took something from our medical supplies." I wasn't surprised. Sophia had known the truth, or at least suspected it. Her giving me the key card had been a calculated risk, insurance that the information would get out even if she didn't survive to reveal it herself. "What did she take?" I asked. "Medications, specific ones. Anti-prion experimental compounds we've been testing on our quarantine subjects." And she left a note mentioning a farmhouse 5 miles outside the quarantine perimeter. Said there's working communication equipment there. The farmhouse, a potential exit point from this nightmare, a way to broadcast the truth to the outside world. If such a place existed and remained accessible, it could change everything. But it would mean leaving the relative safety of my high-rise network, venturing to ground level, traversing miles of infected territory. "I need to get there," I told her. "But first, we have a bigger problem. I found something at East Bank. Information about what this really is." I shared my discoveries, the engineered nature of the pathogen, the deliberate release, the evidence of government involvement. Dr. Reyes listened in silence, asking occasional clarifying questions. When finished, she remained quiet for several long moments. "We've suspected something similar," she finally said. "Our medical team has been tracking anomalies in infection patterns. The elevation effect, the varying cognitive impacts, the recent coordination behaviors. It didn't fit a natural pathogen profile. There's more," I added. "They're testing treatment protocols. I had the data, samples of what might be a counteragent. But I also witnessed something disturbing, an advanced infected who appeared to be controlling others. Her response chilled me. That matches our observations. The infected who breached East Bank weren't random. They were targeting specific access points, disabling security systems. Someone was directing them." We agreed to meet the following day to exchange information and formulate a response. The situation had evolved beyond individual survival. We were now facing an engineered apocalypse with potentially controllable infected. As I prepared for sleep that night, I heard an unusual sound outside my sanctuary, a distinct tapping on glass. Not the random impacts of infected, but deliberate, rhythmic. A signal. Approaching cautiously, I peered through the reinforced windows. On the adjacent building's roof stood a lone figure, male, dressed in medical scrubs, watching my location with unnervingly focused attention. Even at this distance, I recognized him immediately. Test Case 37 from the East Bank Laboratory. He pointed directly at me, then made a slashing gesture across his throat. The meaning was unmistakable. He knew who I was, what I discovered, and was communicating a clear threat. Then he turned and disappeared from view, moving with the fluid coordination of someone entirely in control of their faculties. I spent the night reinforcing my sanctuary's defenses, wondering how he had tracked me to this location. The answer came with sickening clarity when I reviewed the laboratory's security footage I'd downloaded. My face had been clearly captured on entry. If Test Case 37 had access to the building's security systems, he could have identified me, perhaps even tracked my movements back to my primary location. The critical medical supplies we needed, for both survival and potential treatment research, were running dangerously low across all survivor communities. We needed antibiotics, analgesics, surgical supplies, and most importantly, specific medications that Dr. Reyes believed might help develop resistance protocols based on the data I'd acquired. A major hospital stood 3 miles from our location, Northwestern Memorial, one of Chicago's largest medical facilities. It would certainly have been overrun in the initial outbreak, but its pharmaceutical stockpiles might remain intact in secured areas. A ground-level mission to retrieve these supplies was becoming increasingly necessary, despite the extreme risks involved. The following morning, I met with the Leadership Council from 3 survivor communities to plan this critical supply run. Dr. Rice and her medical team provided a detailed list of needed medications. Marcus and his security specialists mapped potential routes and threat concentrations. I contributed my observations about infected behavior patterns and building access methods. We assembled a team of 6, myself, Marcus, Raj from Lakeside, and 3 security specialists from other communities. Each was selected for specific skills: medical knowledge, urban combat experience, navigation expertise. I was included primarily for my climbing abilities and knowledge of building access points. The plan was methodical. We would descend to ground level near daybreak when infected activity typically decreased. Using a mapped route through service alleys and maintenance tunnels, we would approach the hospital from its least exposed entrance, a loading dock on the east side. Once inside, we would proceed directly to the pharmacy stockrooms and secured medication storage. Estimated mission time, 4 hours. Maximum exposures time at ground level, 2 hours. Acceptable risk level. Dangerously high but necessary given our resource situation. We prepared for 3 days, gathering equipment, rehearsing movements, establishing contingency plans. Each team member carried minimal but essential gear: weapons for close encounters, communications equipment, medical supplies, and extraction tools. On the morning of the operation, we gathered on the Metropolitan's lower garage level, the staging area for our descent. The mood was tense but focused. Each person performed equipment checks with methodical precision. We had trained for this, but nothing could fully prepare us for what awaited at ground level. I had spent weeks avoiding the streets, observing them only from above. Now I would walk among the ruins of Chicago, exposed to both the infected and whatever else might have claimed territory in the abandoned city. The descent took us through emergency stairwells, then maintenance tunnels beneath the building. At each checkpoint, team members verified security before signaling all clear. The transition from the vertical world I'd mastered to the horizontal landscape below was disorienting. My senses, attuned to height and climbing challenges, now had to adjust to different threats from all directions. We emerged from the Metropolitan's underground parking structure into early morning light. The streets were unrecognizable, debris filled, vehicles abandoned at odd angles, evidence of desperate evacuation attempts, and everywhere, signs of the infected, blood smears, torn clothing, makeshift barricades that had ultimately failed. Marcus took point, leading us through a predetermined route that minimized exposure. We moved in tight formation, communicating with hand signals rather than voices. The infected were present but scattered, individual wanderers rather than coordinated groups. Their movements were sluggish in the cool morning air, matching my observations about temperature sensitivity. 3 blocks from our starting point, we encountered our first major obstacle. A military blockade had collapsed, leaving combat vehicles and barriers scattered across our planned route. Circumnavigating would expose us for too long. We needed to move through it. The blockade showed signs of massive struggle: bullet impacts, bloodstains, abandoned weapons. Whatever final stand had occurred here had been catastrophic for both sides. Military personnel, now infected, still wandered the area in tattered uniforms. They moved differently than civilian infected, more organized, maintaining formation patterns even in their transformed state. We picked our way through carefully, using vehicles as cover. Halfway across, Raj signaled for attention. Inside an overturned medical transport, partially visible through a shattered window, was a case marked with CDC insignia, the same logo as Sophia's keycard. I approached cautiously, testing the vehicle's stability before attempting to retrieve the case. The door was jammed, requiring careful leverage to open without noise. Inside, the case contained exactly what we feared and hoped for: documentation about the outbreak, including a map of Chicago with infection spread patterns marked in expanding red circles from the water treatment plant. At the center, someone had scrawled "Prioen, not virus," in what appeared to be dried blood. We secured the case and continued toward the hospital, now less than 10 blocks distant. The streets became increasingly difficult to navigate. More wreckage, more evidence of larger infected gatherings. We adjusted our route twice to avoid concentrations visible ahead. The hospital came into view, a massive complex of modern buildings now dark and foreboding. The main entrance was completely inaccessible, barricaded during evacuation attempts. The emergency department showed signs of catastrophic overrun: abandoned ambulances, military vehicles, makeshift treatment areas extending into parking lots. We circled to our planned entry point, the service and supply entrance on the east side. It showed less obvious damage, likely overlooked during the initial crisis when all attention focused on patient areas. Using maintenance keys from my collection, we gained access to the loading dock. The interior was dark, emergency lights providing minimal illumination in corridors designed for staff rather than patients. We moved through service hallways toward the central pharmacy, encountering occasional infected that we avoided rather than engaged whenever possible. The pharmaceutical stockroom was located on the second floor, adjacent to surgical suites. We ascended using service stairs rather than main corridors, maintaining our low-visibility approach. The pharmacy area had been secured during the evacuation, heavy doors locked with both electronic and mechanical systems. Raj worked on the electronic override while I tackled the mechanical locks. After tense minutes of careful manipulation, the doors opened to reveal an untouched cache of medical supplies, organized shelves of medications, surgical materials, and equipment that had remained secured since the outbreak began. We worked systematically through our supply list, filling specialized containers with the most critical items: antibiotics, surgical supplies, pain management medications, and most importantly, the specific compounds Dr. Reyes had requested for her treatment research. As we completed our collection, Marcus spotted an unexpected opportunity: an abandoned CDC mobile testing laboratory in what had been the hospital's research wing. If accessible, it might contain additional information about the outbreak, perhaps even testing equipment and research data. The mobile lab was sealed but undamaged, apparently deployed early in the crisis, then abandoned as the situation deteriorated. Using Sophia's keycard, we gained access to a compact but sophisticated research environment. The interior contained testing equipment, sample storage, and most valuably, a secure data terminal. The terminal activated with the keycard, revealing a trove of information more detailed than what I'd found at Eastbank. Confirmation of everything we suspected: the engineered nature of the pathogen, its deliberate release, the true purpose of the Chicago quarantine as a controlled test environment, rather than a containment response. Most critically, the files contained information about Protocol Icarus, the next phase of the operation. According to the documentation, once sufficient data had been collected on infection patterns and control mechanisms, a neutralization protocol would be initiated through aerial dispersal of the counteragent, not to save Chicago's population, but to demonstrate the weapon's controllability, the ability to activate and deactivate the pathogen on command. The timeline indicated Protocol Icarus was scheduled for implementation within the next 7 days. Chicago wasn't being abandoned. It was being used, its people sacrificed for weapons development. And once the demonstration was complete, evidence suggested similar deployments were planned for other urban centers. I copied all available data to portable drives, securing them in waterproof containers. This information needed to reach outside the quarantine zone, exposed the operation before it could expand beyond Chicago. We had collected our supplies and critical intelligence. Now came the most dangerous part, the return journey through streets that would be more active as the day progressed and temperatures rose. We exited the hospital through our entry point, moving in tight formation with our valuable cargo secured. 2 blocks from the hospital, everything went wrong. A coordinated group of infected emerged from multiple directions simultaneously, cutting off our planned route. These weren't random wanderers but organized hunters moving with tactical precision. Among them, I spotted military-trained infected still wearing tactical gear. "They're being directed," Marcus hissed, recognizing the pattern immediately. "Someone's controlling them." We shifted to our contingency route, moving through a commercial building to access parallel streets. The infected adjusted accordingly, maintaining pursuit from multiple angles. This wasn't mindless aggression. It was a coordinated effort to capture or eliminate our team. 3 blocks later, we were effectively cut off from our return route to the Metropolitan. Infected had moved to block each access point, forcing us toward the University District. Our options narrowed to a desperate alternative, the multi-level parking structure visible 2 blocks ahead. If we could reach it and ascend, we might establish a defensive position and signal for extraction from above. The dash to the parking structure was a gauntlet of near misses. Infected lunged from doorways, alleyways, abandoned vehicles. We maintained formation, protecting our supply cargo while creating space for movement. Every team member exhibited the discipline of their training, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. We reached the parking structure's ground-level entrance, with infected less than 30 meters behind us. The structure itself was relatively intact, a concrete monolith 8 stories tall. If we could reach the upper levels, we might establish a position for potential rope extraction from adjacent buildings. As we cleared the 3rd level, disaster struck. A section of ramp collapsed under our weight, dropping Raj and 1 security specialist to the level below. The security specialist was immediately swarmed by infected who had followed us into the structure. Raj managed to scramble to a defensive position behind a concrete pillar, but was cut off from our group. Marcus made the difficult but necessary call. "Continue ascending. I'll extract Raj if possible. Secure the supplies at all costs." He dropped back to provide covering fire, while the remaining team members continued upward with the medical supplies. I faced an impossible choice: continue with the mission or help my allies. The supplies were critical for hundreds of survivors. 2 lives balanced against hundreds. In that moment, my training took over. Mission parameters were clear. The supplies had absolute priority. I continued upward with the team, reaching the top level of the parking structure. From there, we established defensive positions and deployed emergency signals to the nearest high-rise communities. Looking down through the central atrium of the parking structure, I witnessed Marcus's desperate effort to reach Raj. He was moving with incredible skill, using vehicles as cover, creating distractions to draw infected away from Raj's position. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed. Then I spotted him. Test Case 37, standing on a pedestrian bridge connected to the parking structure's 4th level. He wasn't attacking, he was observing, gesturing, and the infected were responding to his silent commands, adjusting their movements to counter Marcus's strategy. I raised my binoculars for a clearer view, and Test Case 37 looked directly at me. Even at that distance, I could see the recognition in his expression. He pointed at me, then made that same throat-slashing gesture from our previous encounter. A clear message: I was a specific target. Within 30 minutes, our emergency signals were acknowledged. A security team from a nearby survivor settlement deployed a rescue operation using adjacent rooftops. Through an elaborate rope system, they established extraction lines to our position. The medical supplies were transferred first, followed by personnel. I was the last to leave the parking structure rooftop. As I secured my harness to the extraction line, I took a final look below. The structure was swarming with infected, moving in coordinated patterns I'd never observed before. And on that same pedestrian bridge, Test Case 37 remained, watching my escape with clinical detachment. The extraction succeeded. The supplies reached the survivor communities, but Raj and Marcus were lost, along with the security specialist who had fallen with Raj. 3 lives sacrificed for the greater mission. The cost of ground-level operations was brutally reinforced. Back in the relative safety of the high-rise network, I processed what we witnessed. The infected were evolving, or more accurately, being directed by individuals like Test Case 37, subjects who maintained higher cognitive functions despite infection. The weapon wasn't just creating mindless aggressors, it was establishing a hierarchy of control. The documents we'd recovered confirmed the worst. Chicago was a testing ground. Protocol Icarus wasn't salvation but demonstration, proving the pathogen could be activated and deactivated on command, creating a controllable population of diminished humans while preserving selected individuals with full cognitive function to serve as controllers. This information needed to reach the outside world before the program could expand beyond Chicago. Sophia's note about the farmhouse with communication equipment suddenly became our most critical lead. If such a place existed, if it remained accessible, it might provide our only chance to broadcast the truth. That night, I made the decision that would lead me to my current situation. I would attempt to reach the farmhouse Sophia had mentioned, 5 miles outside the city center, reportedly equipped with radio equipment powerful enough to breach the quarantine communications blackout. The journey would require extended ground-level travel, the most dangerous undertaking since the outbreak began. I would be leaving the vertical world I'd mastered for hostile territory where my climbing skills offered limited advantage. But the information had to get out, whatever the personal risk. I prepared methodically, selecting equipment for maximum mobility rather than extended operations. The journey would be one way. Either I reached the farmhouse and successfully transmitted the information, or I wouldn't return at all. I left my complete route maps and supply cache locations with Dr. Reyes, ensuring my knowledge wouldn't die with me if the mission failed. As dawn approached, I began my descent from the vertical world that had been my sanctuary for a month. The ground below awaited, along with the infected, Test Case 37's hunters, and whatever other horrors Chicago had spawned in the weeks since I last walked its streets. Little did I know that what I would find at the farmhouse would be even more disturbing than what we'd already discovered, or that my transmission would receive a response I never anticipated. Leaving the vertical world I'd established was harder than I expected. For a month, I'd survived by never touching the ground, creating a network above the nightmare Chicago had become. Now I was deliberately descending into it, abandoning every advantage I'd cultivated. I chose my exit point carefully, a commercial building at the quarantine zone's perimeter, selected for its lower infected concentration and proximity to routes leading out of the city. The descent took 4 hours, moving methodically down service shafts and emergency stairwells, pausing frequently to verify clear passages. My equipment was minimal but essential: weapons for defense, navigation tools, communications equipment, water purification supplies, and most critically, data drives containing everything we discovered about the engineered outbreak and Protocol Icarus. The information had to reach the outside world, whatever the cost. The ground-level city was worse than I remembered. A month of abandonment had transformed Chicago into something barely recognizable. Nature was already reclaiming streets, weeds pushing through cracked pavement, small animals scurrying between abandoned vehicles. The infected had established territories, visible through marking patterns that reminded me disturbingly of primitive human behavior: blood smears forming crude symbols, arranged objects creating boundary markers. I moved cautiously, using the urban navigation skills from my Parker background, combined with observation patterns I developed from above. Stay near cover. Move during temperature troughs when infected are sluggish. Use elevation when available. Avoid open spaces. Create distraction paths before committing to routes. The first mile was slow but uneventful. I encountered scattered infected but avoided engagement using distraction techniques. The city thinned toward the perimeter, transitioning from dense urban landscape to industrial zones, then to residential neighborhoods. The infection patterns changed correspondingly: fewer coordinated groups, more solitary wanderers. At the 2-mile mark, I encountered the quarantine barrier, a hastily constructed combination of military fencing, concrete barriers, and guard positions. Now abandoned by living personnel, the barrier remained patrolled by infected military units, still wearing tatters of their uniforms, carrying weapons they no longer had the cognitive function to operate. I observed the patrol patterns for an hour, identifying a section where fencing had partially collapsed. The timing would be critical: a 4-minute window between patrol passes. When the moment came, I moved swiftly across exposed ground, scaled the damaged fencing, and dropped to the outer perimeter. Beyond the quarantine line, I expected to find evidence of military containment operations: command posts, vehicle staging, medical facilities. Instead, I found abandonment. Whatever forces had established the quarantine had withdrawn entirely, leaving only automated surveillance systems, cameras mounted on tall poles, drone charging stations, satellite uplinks. The human elements had been removed, replaced by technology that wouldn't become infected. The farmhouse Sophia had mentioned was supposedly 5 miles from the city center, identifiable by solar panels and a ham radio antenna. My position now placed me approximately 3 miles out, with 2 miles of suburban landscape to traverse before reaching potential farmland. The suburbs presented new challenges. Less cover, more open space, different infected behavior patterns. These areas had been evacuated early in the crisis, with residents relocated to temporary shelter facilities downtown that ultimately became death traps when the infection spread. The infected here were primarily returnees, people who had fled back to their homes as the situation deteriorated, bringing the infection with them. I picked my way through residential streets, moving from house to house using backyards and fence lines for cover. The infected were fewer but displayed disturbing territorial behaviors, remaining near their former homes, performing broken versions of daily routines. A woman in a bathrobe repeatedly opening and closing her front door. A man with blackened skin moving lawn furniture in endless reorganization. Children's infected forms playing distorted games in backyards. By late afternoon, I reached the transition to agricultural areas. Open fields presented the greatest danger yet, extended distances with minimal cover. I would have to wait for dusk when visibility decreased for both the infected and any surveillance systems monitoring the perimeter. I found temporary shelter in an abandoned equipment shed at the edge of a cornfield. While waiting for optimal movement conditions, I reviewed my maps and equipment. The farmhouse should be less than a mile ahead, assuming Sophia's information was accurate. I checked the data drives obsessively, ensuring they remained undamaged. Everything depended on this information reaching someone who could expose what was happening in Chicago. As twilight approached, I prepared to move. The open terrain would require a different strategy, speed over stealth, direct paths rather than covered routes. I plotted a course along irrigation ditches and field boundaries that offered minimal concealment. The run across open country was the most exposed I'd been since the outbreak began. After weeks of vertical movement, the horizontal sprint felt alien, my muscles protesting the unfamiliar demands. Halfway across, I spotted movement to my left, infected emerging from a distant tree line, alerted to my presence despite the failing light. They moved with purpose, cutting across the field to intercept my path rather than pursuing directly. This wasn't random aggression but coordinated hunting. Somehow, they knew I was coming. Perhaps Test Case 37's influence extended even to this perimeter, or perhaps automated surveillance had marked my movement and attracted their attention. I adjusted course, angling toward a small creek that cut through the farmland. The water barrier might slow their pursuit. The detour added precious minutes to my journey as darkness settled fully over the landscape. The farmhouse appeared precisely where Sophia had indicated, a 2-story structure on elevated ground, solar panels visible on the roof, a large antenna array beside it. No lights showed, but that was expected if the location was meant to remain undetected by authorities. I approached cautiously, circling the property to identify potential threats. The building appeared undisturbed, no broken windows, doors intact, no signs of infected presence. What's promising, the antenna system showed recent adjustments, suggesting active maintenance. The pursuing infected had lost my trail at the creek crossing, but they would eventually track me to this location. I needed to gain entry, assess the communication equipment, and transmit the data as quickly as possible. The farmhouse door was locked but not barricaded. Using techniques from my urban exploration background, I gained entry through a partially open basement window. The interior was dark but organized, not abandoned in panic but deliberately maintained. Supplies were stacked neatly. Water collection systems had been established, a sustainable outpost, not a temporary shelter. I climbed the stairs to the main floor, alert for any occupants. The living areas were dusty but orderly. A kitchen with preserved food supplies. A living room with furniture arranged for functionality rather than comfort. And most importantly, a radio room converted from what had been a home office. The communication setup was impressive, professional-grade equipment, multiple power sources, signal-boosting technology. This wasn't a hobbyist ham radio, but a deliberate communications outpost disguised as one. Military-grade technology hidden in civilian housing. As I examined the equipment, a notebook beside the main radio caught my attention. Inside were transmission logs, regular communications with someone identified only as Command. The entries documented observations about Chicago, infected behavior patterns, effectiveness of the quarantine barriers. This wasn't a survivor's outpost. It was an observation post for whoever had engineered the outbreak. The final entry, dated just 3 days earlier, chilled me. Subject W47 to 37, performing beyond parameters. Cognitive retention at 87%. Control function expanding. Recommend acceleration of protocol Icarus timeline before subject establishes independent objectives. DO47 to 37. The designation matched the project codes from the CDC files. This was referring to test case 37, the advanced infected I'd encountered. According to this log, he wasn't just a test subject, but a deliberately created controller whose abilities were exceeding his creator's expectations. He was developing independence from their influence. The radio system was operational, connected to backup power through the solar array. I familiarized myself with the equipment, identifying frequencies listed in the logbook. If I transmitted on these channels, command would receive the information directly. But could I trust the very people who had engineered this nightmare to expose their own program? Alternative frequencies were needed: civilian emergency bands, military channels not associated with the project, international monitoring stations. I would broadcast widely, transmitting the data to as many potential recipients as possible. Someone would recognize the importance of what they were receiving. I prepared the transmission package, connecting the data drives, recording a brief verbal summary of what we discovered, explaining the evidence contained in the files. The entire package would transmit as an encrypted burst, with decryption keys included in the initial broadcast. As I finalized the preparations, I heard them, shuffling movements outside the farmhouse. The infected had tracked me to this location. Through the windows, I could see forms moving in the darkness surrounding the property. Dozens of them, moving with coordination that suggested direction rather than random aggression. I secured the doors and windows as best I could, but the farmhouse wasn't designed as a fortress. It would hold them temporarily, nothing more. The transmission became even more urgent, possibly my final act before being overrun. I initiated the broadcast sequence, transmitting on all identified frequencies simultaneously. The data would take approximately 7 minutes to transmit completely, an eternity with infected breaking through ground floor windows. I barricaded myself in the radio room, sealing the door with furniture. As the transmission progressed, I continued recording verbal explanation to accompany the data files. This is Winslow Abernethy, transmitting from Quarantine Zone Perimeter, Chicago outbreak. The infection was engineered, a weaponized prion-designated compound PV-47, deliberately released through the water supply. This wasn't an accident but a controlled test of a bioweapon designed to create controllable human subjects. Evidence is contained in the attached files. The infected breached the ground floor 3 minutes into the transmission. I could hear them moving through the house, searching methodically rather than randomly destroying. They weren't just hunting by sound or scent. They were conducting a deliberate search operation. 5 minutes into the transmission, a response came through on one of the military frequencies, not from command, but from what appeared to be regular military channels outside the project. Transmitting station, this is Captain Leland, USAF. We are receiving your data burst. Transmission is corrupted. Repeat, we need cleaner signal. I adjusted the equipment, boosting signal strength. Captain Leland, data contains evidence of engineered pathogen release in Chicago. Deliberate bioweapon test designated Project W47. Quarantine was pre-planned containment for testing, not emergency response. They're planning to expand to additional cities. The response was immediate. Understood. Continue transmission. What is Protocol Icarus referenced in your data? Aerial dispersal of counteragent, scheduled within 7 days. Not to save population, but to demonstrate weapons controllability, activation and deactivation on command. Need coordinates of all high-rise survivor communities to target delivery. The implications hit me as I spoke. They didn't need my maps to find the survivor communities. They needed my specialized knowledge of vertical access routes, the Sky network I'd created, to efficiently deliver the counteragent to specific targets. The farmhouse's second floor shuddered as something heavy struck the stairs. The infected were no longer searching randomly but converging on my location. The radio room door wouldn't hold much longer. Captain Leland, infected, have breached my position. Transmission must be received completely. Files contain evidence, research data, witnesses for testimony. His response confirmed my worst fears. We have your coordinates. Helicopter extraction team is inbound. Provide them with all route information for Chicago high-rise structures when they arrive. This is critical for Protocol Icarus implementation. They weren't coming to rescue a whistleblower. They were coming to extract the last piece of information they needed. By mapped routes through Chicago's vertical landscape, the access points that would allow precise delivery of their counteragent to survivor communities. The transmission completed as the infected reached the second floor. I had minutes, perhaps seconds, before they breached the radio room. Outside, I could hear approaching helicopter rotors. Not salvation, but the next phase of their operation. I made a critical decision in those final moments. With the transmission complete, I activated the equipment's emergency overload function, a built-in feature designed to prevent technology capture. The radio system would short-circuit, destroying the drives containing my maps and route information. They would get me, but not the knowledge that would allow them to efficiently implement Protocol Icarus. The infected breached the door as the helicopter landed outside. In the chaos that followed, I caught glimpses of tactical teams deploying from the aircraft. Not standard military but specialized units wearing biohazard gear marked with logos I recognized from the CDC files. Project personnel, not rescue teams. Among them, walking unprotected despite the presumed contamination risk, was a familiar figure, Test Case 37. He wasn't hunting me. He was working with them, directing the infected like a handler controlling attack dogs. As they entered the farmhouse, I retreated to the attic access point, a hatch in the hallway ceiling. The infected couldn't climb effectively, but the tactical team would have no such limitations. I had moments to make my final preparations. The attic was dusty, cramped, with minimal access points, a defensive position that played to my vertical movement strengths. I barricaded the hatch behind me and took stock of my situation. The farmhouse was surrounded. Helicopter extraction teams were deployed outside. Infected controlled by Test Case 37 had breached the interior. Military teams were entering methodically. Most importantly, the data had been transmitted successfully to at least some recipients outside the project's control. Whether they would act on it remained uncertain, but the information was no longer contained solely within the quarantine zone. Through gaps in the attic walls, I could see additional helicopters approaching, larger transport models rather than tactical units. Whatever they were planning, it involved substantial resources. Protocol Icarus was accelerating. I heard them coordinating below, tactical teams communicating with Test Case 37, who responded with perfect clarity despite his infected status. He wasn't a victim of the pathogen, but its culmination, a human subject who maintained cognitive function while gaining control abilities over standard infected. The prototype for their controllable human weapon. He's in the attic. I heard Test Case 37 say. The infected can't reach him there, but he has nowhere else to go. The data drives were destroyed in the transmission equipment, but he memorized the routes. We need him alive. They needed my knowledge of the vertical routes through Chicago's high-rises, the access points, the structural weaknesses, the paths between buildings that would allow them to deliver their counteragent precisely to survivor communities. Without that information, Protocol Icarus would be less efficient, less targeted, potentially allowing some survivors to avoid the demonstration of their weapon's controllability. The attic hatch rattled as they attempted to breach it. My barricade would hold temporarily, but not against determined military personnel with proper equipment. I retreated to the far end of the attic, where roof access might provide a final escape option. That's when I found it, Sophia's final message. Hidden in the attic insulation was a waterproof case containing a digital recorder and a handwritten note. If you're reading this, you found the farmhouse and likely discovered its true purpose. I worked for them until I saw what they were really creating. The recorder contains my testimony and authentication codes that prove my identity. Make sure this reaches people who can stop Protocol Icarus before they expand beyond Chicago. Sophia hadn't just been a CDC worker. She'd been part of Project DB47, a scientist who'd turned against the program when she understood its true objectives. Her disappearance from Lakeside hadn't been elimination by infected, but a desperate attempt to reach this communication outpost and transmit the truth. I secured the recorder with my remaining equipment. If I couldn't escape, perhaps this critical evidence still could. The tactical team was breaching the attic hatch now, specialized tools cutting through my barricades. Test Case 37's voice directed their efforts with disturbing precision. Remember, we need him functional enough to extract the route information. After that, he becomes another test subject. His climbing adaptations make him ideal for the next phase research. They didn't just want my knowledge, They wanted me as a research subject for whatever horrific evolution of their weapon came next. I would not give them either. Removing my notebook containing all my route maps and access codes, I methodically began destroying pages, committing critical information to memory while ensuring no physical record remained. The roof access point was my final option, a small ventilation opening that might allow escape to the exterior. If I could reach the roof, my climbing abilities might give me an advantage the tactical teams lacked. That's when I spotted it. A small digital camera hidden in the attic beams, positioned to record everything happening in this space. Someone was monitoring this location remotely, someone separate from the teams breaching the farmhouse. Whether ally or additional enemy remained unclear, but its presence suggested complexities beyond what I'd uncovered. With the tactical team seconds from breaking through, I made my decision. I would transmit one final message before they took me, record what I knew, what I discovered, in hopes that someone would receive it and act. The digital recorder Sophia had left would serve as my last testimony. I activated the device and began speaking rapidly, documenting everything from the beginning. My observations from the window washing platform, the vertical world I'd created, the discovered files about Project DB47, Protocol Icarus, Test Case 37, the planned expansion beyond Chicago. Everything that might help prevent this engineered apocalypse from spreading further. The attic hatch splintered as tactical teams broke through. I continued recording, speaking directly to whoever might eventually find this testimony. My name is Winslow Abernethy. For a month I survived the zombie apocalypse by never touching the ground. I created a network of sky routes across Chicago, witnessed the catastrophe from above. Now I'm trapped in this farmhouse attic, surrounded by the infected who are learning to climb. This is how I survived, and why I might not make it through tonight. Test Case 37 was the first through the breach, moving with disturbing fluidity for someone infected. Behind him came tactical personnel in full biohazard gear. He smiled at me, a human expression incongruous with his infected status. The high-rise window washer. We've been watching you for weeks. Your climbing adaptations are impressive. Your route system even more so. You'll be an excellent addition to our research. I refused to give them what they wanted. Protocol Icarus has been exposed. The transmission went through to multiple recipients. It's over. His smile didn't falter. No one will believe it without proof. We control the quarantine narrative. Chicago was a tragic accident, nothing more. The next city will be handled more discreetly. As tactical personnel surrounded me, Test Case 37 continued. You have two options. Cooperate by providing your route information and join our program as a valued test subject, or resist and become another mindless infected. Either way, your knowledge will serve the project. I palmed Sophia's recorder, concealing it as they secured my arms. The device continued recording, capturing Test Case 37's admissions. If I could preserve this evidence, hide it somewhere in the farmhouse attic before they removed me, perhaps someone would eventually find it. You created something you can't control, I told him, stalling while looking for placement opportunities. The files showed your cognitive retention exceeding parameters. You're not following their program anymore. You have your own objectives. Something flashed across his expression. Confirmation I'd struck a nerve. Perceptive. The project directors believe on their success story. They don't realize what they've actually created is their replacement. Evolution always supersedes its creators. The tactical team seemed oblivious to the implications of his statement, focused on securing me for transport. I suspected they weren't fully briefed on the project's details, just extraction specialists following orders. As they prepared to move me, I spotted my opportunity. A gap in the attic insulation near a support beam, barely visible but accessible. With a practiced motion from years of hiding small objects at building summits, I slipped Sophia's recorder into the space as they pulled me toward the hatch. My final act of resistance complete, I faced whatever came next. The helicopters would take me back to Chicago, to whatever facility housed Project HLU-47's research operations. They would attempt to extract my knowledge of the vertical routes, then use me as a test subject for their evolving weapon. But the information was out, transmitted to military channels outside the project's control, and now Sophia's testimony hidden for some future discoverer. Whether it would be enough to stop Protocol Icarus and prevent expansion to other cities remained uncertain. As they led me from the attic, Test Case 37 leaned close, speaking for my ears alone. Your vertical adaptation strategies are fascinating. We've been developing climbing capabilities in selected subjects, but your natural techniques are superior. You'll help us perfect the next generation. Together, we'll create something that can reach any survivor anywhere. The implications were horrifying. Infected who could climb as efficiently as I could, rendering even the high-rise sanctuaries vulnerable. The vertical world I'd created as salvation would become just another hunting ground for their evolved weapon. Outside, the helicopters waited to transport us back to Chicago. The night sky was clear, stars visible above the farmhouse. I took what might be my last look at open sky, remembering the month I'd spent above the nightmare, traversing my network of routes between buildings, watching the city fall while I survived in the vertical world. Whatever happened next, I had accomplished what I came to do. The transmission was sent. Sophia's testimony was hidden. The truth about Project Dili 47 and Protocol Icarus would reach the outside world. Whether anyone would act on it in time to prevent the next city's fall remained to be seen. If you're receiving this message, understand what we're facing isn't a natural disaster, but an engineered apocalypse. The infected aren't mindless zombies but test subjects in a weapon program designed to create controllable human assets. Chicago was just the beginning. Protocol Icarus isn't salvation but demonstration, and Test Case 37 isn't following their program anymore. He's evolving beyond their control. Look up. The vertical world saved me for a month. It might save you too. Touch the doorframe 3 times before entering any room. Not superstition anymore but survival. And remember, height isn't just strategic advantage. It's biological protection against the waterborne delivery system. The infected are learning to climb, but so can you.